开放带来进步。
Openness brings progress, while self-seclusion leaves one behind. China will not close its door to the world. We will only become more open.
President Xi Jinping says China will open its markets wider to foreign investors as it expands its global influence. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. President Xi Jinping declared China is entering a new era of development in his speech before the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China. He called for national unity and support for the party to achieve a moderately prosperous society by 2020 and a strong, advanced country by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic. President Xi affirmed China will take a more assertive role in global concerns, including trade, cybersecurity, terrorism and climate change, and he pledged to make significant reforms on foreign access to China's market.
The dream of the Chinese people is closely connected with the dreams of the peoples in the rest of the world. The Chinese dream can be realized only in a peaceful international environment and under a stable international order. We must keep in mind both the domestic and international situations, stay on the path of peaceful development, and continue to pursue a mutually beneficial strategy of opening up.
CGTN's John Terrett joins us now from Beijing. And John, President Xi covered a lot of ground in that 3.5-hour speech. But in terms of the economy, what does Xi Jinping hope to accomplish? What's at the top of the agenda?
Well, you know, Arnie, I think you only have to look at that list of words published the day after the speech in the China Daily to get an idea. Those words were development and people and construction and socialism. And those words came up in that 3-hour speech more than any other. And I think that's a pretty big clue right there. You have to remember, Anand, that the Chinese economy is in a transitional stage at the moment after years and years of very, very rapid growth. I mean, 25 years or more, and certainly in the last 5 years. We're now moving to a stage here where the economy is really looking to be a higher quality economy rather than the one that's just cranking out stuff at a high rate. And indeed, one of the issues that President Xi brought up in the speech on Wednesday was that he wants the economy here to be quality first and to have performance in all areas of industry as a priority. Anand?
So, John, unpackage that for us. What does that mean?
Well, I think realistically, it means dovetailing the Chinese economy, jiving the Chinese economy, if you will, much more with the economy of the real world, what's actually going on. Now, top priority among that is technological innovation. And indeed, I've just come back from a press conference, it was late last night, here in Beijing, a press conference that dealt solely with technological innovation at the Media Center here for the 19th National Congress. I think he's also talking about modern financing. Now that's extraordinary, and it's very important for American companies to hear this because there's a great interest in the Belt and the Road, but there is concern among American companies about how a lot of that might be financed, and they're worried about doing business with Chinese banks because of perceived transparency issues and that sort of thing. So modern financing is one of the ideas he has on the table. Better use of human resources. As China has expanded around the world, it's often run into local difficulties with local workers, so that's what he's talking about there. A more market-based economy, he mentioned at one point, and that's fascinating to hear as well because he mentioned the word supply. Now that's Thatcher and Reaganomics for you. Now, of course, he's not talking about that. He's always keeping socialism and the party front and center. It's very interesting to hear him mention that word. And then dynamic micro-industries. You know, we are told that 15,000 people registered an interest in running a company here every day in the last 3 years, and a lot of those will be technological companies. Sound macro regulation, that's just what it sounds like, regulation across the whole of China, like we have in the West, but which in many cases doesn't apply here just yet. And then beyond that, it's integration of the Chinese web industry to try and catch up with America's, which is the biggest in the world, greater use of artificial intelligence, that's driverless cars for you, low carbon, green, low emission economy jobs and industries around the country. And finally, he's talking about lifting, as he sees it, the valuation of Chinese companies in the eyes of the rest of the world from the present mid-level to a high valuation level, thinking of creating some of the Chinese versions of some of the big American companies. Of course, we already see the likes of Alibaba and Baidu, but more of those. Anna?
Okay, great, John. Thanks a lot. That's CGTN's John Terrett reporting from Beijing. Now, let's get to our panel for more on China's 19th Party Congress. Joining us from Beijing is Zou Yue. He's the anchor of China 24, a news magazine show on CGTN. Here with us in Washington, D.C. is Zhang. He is the Chief Correspondent for Shanghai Wen Hui Daily. From Vancouver, we're joined by Yves Tiberghien. He's the Director Emeritus of the Institute of Asian Research at the University of British Columbia. And Saurabh Gupta is a Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist at the Institute for China-America Studies right here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to all of you to the show. Zou Yue, let me start with you in Beijing. We heard President Xi in that speech call on members of the Communist Party of China to advance, and let me quote here, socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. What does the president mean by that?
Well, in that phrase, there are three words I want to focus. That is socialism, Chinese, and new. It is socialism with Chinese characters. It's meaning that China would develop market economy as everybody else. But, of course, there will be a strong, visible hand from the government. And that's the Chinese way of conducting business. New era means Chinese economy is different from 70 years ago, or even 30 years ago. Now, China is #1 manufacturer in the world, probably #1 trader in the world, and one of the biggest manufacturer, and very soon a very important financier. So the weight and scale of the Chinese economy is so huge that nobody can live without. But the problem is all these fast development came with a heavy price. That is the toll on environment and energy consumption. And Chinese economy might want to make it over. But how? I think by making it smarter and lighter. Smarter means that China will use all the latest development of human ingenuity and technologies like big data, artificial intelligence, robotics, to increase, max up the productivity as best as it can. But making it lighter, I think it means to reduce the Chinese footprint on Mother Nature. That's why China stick to the Paris Climate Agreement, although the U.S. Decides to pull out of it. And that's why China wants to get more fossil fuel automobiles off the cars and develop more electric vehicles. Green energy is not a maybe here in China, it's a must.
So let's talk about the economic outlook. In that speech, General Secretary Xi Jinping talked about two economic targets called centennial goals. First, he wants to build a moderately prosperous society by wiping out poverty by 2021. And secondly, he wants to turn China into a fully developed economy by 2049. Expand on that for us. What is China going to look like in the next 2-3 decades?
I think, shortly speaking, I would call it like a developed country like America or European countries, but in a Chinese character. And obviously, the economy will be much more bigger at that time, and per capita GDP, that means people's income will be much higher than now. And our comprehensive strength will be also much stronger. But I would like to say ordinary people like me will be expecting many challenges faced by China, faced by people, will be solved at the time. Like this environmental kind of problem. We want to see a very clean water, very clean air. And also, retired people should be provided much better the social welfare, and our education should be much better and also fair. And also, the ordinary people will enjoy more like Medicare. This kind of things, these challenges faced by China should be solved at that time. That's my interpretation.
Right. Saurabh, what is your broad assessment of President Xi's speech? And put it into context for us, what kind of imprint is he going to leave on China?
I thought it was an absolutely commanding speech. I thought it was a historic speech, and here is the reason why. Socialism with Chinese characteristics was the term, the phraseology that Deng Xiaoping had formulated to draw a line under the Maoist period and usher in a new period of openness and institutionalized political competition within the Chinese Communist Party so that they could be more unified and operate as a collective leadership. President Xi Jinping, in his speech, by talking of that new era, has in fact shown himself to be an heir to Deng Xiaoping, hoping to use his charisma as part of the collective leadership of the Communist Party and guide now the Communist Party, state, party, and country to a new set of goals based on that premise of openness. So in that regard, I thought it was very important. He is also very, very powerful, and he could easily have translated that slogan as his personal slogan. He could have attached his name to it, like Mao Zedong thought, like Deng Xiaoping theory. He did not do so, even though he had the capacity to do so. And like Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin, he has in fact used his charisma and ascribed it to the collective leadership of the party. I think this is very important, and it will hold China and the Communist Party good for a long period of time ahead.
Okay, let me bring in Yves from Vancouver. And Yves, over the last 5 years, China has lifted 60 million people out of poverty. I want you to take a listen to what President Xi had to say. Let's watch.
People's livelihoods have continuously improved. The people-centered philosophy of development has taken roots through implementation of a large number of measures benefiting the people, and people's sense of gains has been greatly enhanced. The battle against poverty has made decisive progress. More than 60 million impoverished people have shaken off poverty, with the poverty headcount ratio dropping from 10.2% to less than 4%.
So, Yves, that is quite an accomplishment. How has Beijing been able to achieve this? And what can other developing countries learn from that?
Well, it's a two-part approach. And in a way, it's the core of the socialist approach with Chinese characteristics. So on one hand, boost growth, expand the pie, and on the other hand, be very, very hard-nosed and very clear-eyed about the pockets of poverty that remain, that are not touched by the general growth, and then target those. And so there has been very strong programs of poverty alleviation. There have also been programs that are targeted within provinces, say Chongqing, for example, where there is more integration between the urban core and the rural areas to try to get the rural areas out of poverty. So it's a combination of national poverty alleviation plan with more targeted provincial level and city level poverty alleviation plans. There are targets that are given to officials. So there's a whole plan on the distribution side to accompany the general growth approach.
Zou Yue, poverty alleviation, that's been a priority for the Chinese government. And we know, and we've seen the results, hundreds of millions of people, lifted out of poverty. But what are employment prospects like for Chinese people, especially for young people coming onto the job market? How will this economic outlook that's envisaged and articulated by President Xi going to meet that demand for jobs?
I think if it is a subject of examination, then poverty reduction for China, the mark should be A+. Over the past 3 decades, 800 million people were lifted out of poverty. That's the entire population of the United States, plus Japan, plus West Europe. That's astronomical success for China. But still, there are 50 million people still living under poverty line now. And Mr. Xi's plan is to pull all of them out of poverty by 2020. Why he's so convicted on this, I think it came from his background. Because he lived poverty. He stared at poverty's face when he was young. Between the age of 15 and 22, he was a farmer. He fed pigs. He carried mud. He lived poverty. And he felt poverty like a hurt limp, I think. So that's why he's so convicted. He wants no more of that in his country. And the Chinese are good at making plans, and probably they are even better at making those plans into reality. Through the meticulous planning, as our earlier panelists said, they will deliver on those targets. I believe with the strong conviction, poverty will be something of the past by 2020 in China.